Welcome back to Off the Curb. Justin Spiro here. And, it's another day of the week. It's another day on the calendar, which means it's a great day to talk about Mel Tucker's contract, whether he's making too much money, who's paying him all that goddamn money. If you want to talk about anything other than Mel Tucker's contract, I don't have time for you, because there's nothing on the planet more interesting than Mel Tucker's contract. So you can have your topic du jour. You can have your cause celeb. For me, it's Mel Tucker contract talk or bust, and that's where we're going to start today. I'm going to get to our dignified, great, all-time legend guest and good friend of mine, Tony Paul, in a minute. But first, I want to set the table for what we're talking about with a Tony Paul tweet. So let's start there. News breaks yesterday. Tony, good reporting on this. It's the Detroit Free Press's lawsuit, but the Detroit News had a great sort of breakthrough piece on it. Quote, MSU has 10 days to turn over details of the donor agreement between the university and Matt Ishbia and Steve St. Andre over the Mel Tucker football contract. This breaks yesterday afternoon. Michigan State now must disclose these donor agreements in that Mel Tucker contract. And the article is great, by the way. Go check it out. Tony's reporting, as usual, spot on. So, look, I feel like we kind of knew this was coming. This lawsuit's been out there for a while. It was not a super, super favorable to Michigan State lawsuit in terms of the applicability to FOIA. We don't really know exactly whether this was the right call by the judge, because it's hard to argue whether the nature of this contract and the terms in question are FOIA exempt, because we don't know what they are. My guess is that the judge's read is probably fair. So, just throwing it out there without having seen the contract, no one can really weigh intelligently in on this thing, because we don't know whether it qualifies as a privacy exempt FOIA contract or not. But I don't think this even matters. And that's not really my focus. I'm not really into the whether or not this should be FOIA exempt thing. It probably should be available to the public, frankly, from a technical FOIA perspective. But I think it's if you're willing to just blindly default to the judge's ruling, which I'm willing to do, let's just say it's not my assertion that this contract in question is objectively improper when measured against the standards of the Freedom of Information Act. So where does my issue lie? Why am I all in a tizzy on Twitter? Why are Michigan State people in a tizzy on Twitter? The Detroit Free Press has engaged in what is now successful litigation against Michigan State for the primary, if not sole, purpose of securing desirable clickbait. That's my opinion. That's what a lot of people seem to think. How did this start? It started with the question of, hey, how much did Matt Ishbia and Steve St. Andre chip into this thing? Then that comes out publicly, and then sort of the bigger pivot becomes, oh, but can they fire Mel Tucker? Do they have a seat at the table? Can Matt Ishbia call up at halftime of the Rutgers game next year and say, you better get Mel Tucker out of town? I mean, so this thing has sort of evolved into how much was it? What's their influence? It's just, to me, an interest that outpaces the interest that it should have in terms of importance to the public interest. This whole thing has been framed as the Detroit Free Press valiantly fighting for Joe Public, who has a right to know about the details of the contract. That this is somehow in the public interest. It is the civic duty of the Detroit Free Press to uncover the nature of this bonus and the extension that two billionaire donors funded privately. So, I mean, very quickly, history of FOIA. Ben, throw up the federal history of FOIA note. So this is the federal. We're not into the Michigan yet. The Freedom of Information Act was intended to make the U.S. government agencies' functions more transparent so that the American public could more easily identify problems in government functioning and put pressure on Congress, agency officials, and the president to address them. That's from one of my actual law school textbooks. Let's go to the Michigan FOIA, which states do have their own FOIA laws. Quote, it is the public policy of this state that all persons are entitled to full and complete information regarding the affairs of government and the official acts of those who represent them as public officials, employees consistent with this act, the employee shall be informed so that they may fully participate in the democratic process. That is right from the Michigan compiled laws. That's from the act itself. So I would just ask you, does this whole free press thing seem in the spirit of FOIA? Private donations to a football coach? Truly, why does it matter? I think we only care because it's interesting. It's clickbait. This isn't a government official in charge of who gets some oil contract. There's zero tax dollars going towards the contract. So whether or not we have a technical right to access the documents, the pearl clutching, celebration, dunking on Twitter from the media today and yesterday more so is just bizarre to me. It's clickbait. Just call it what it is. The public has a real fetish for Mel Tucker's contract, and the free press is utterly determined to deliver them the goods. My takeaway, just spare me the sanctimony. Just save it. Like you have the masses that are interested in this contract. It's an obsession on a universal scale at this point. You went full TMZ on this subject. That's fine. Just that's where I want to leave it for now. Someone who strongly disagrees with me, whom I love, who has the title for most appearances on this show, I think tied with Chris Castellani. Tony Paul, Detroit News, having at me last night via Twitter, via text message. We were having a spirited debate. Tony, I'm ready to get yelled at. I'm ready. Where am I off here on this one?
Well, thanks for having me, Justin. I'm not going to yell like we talked about a little bit ago. It's a little too early to yell, but I would say that we make mention of the Michigan State fans or whatever being a tizzy over this. I would say that you contributed to that, so thank you.
Oh,
100%. Look, here's my argument to you, and it was my argument yesterday. Mel Tucker is a public employee who works for a public institution, which is under the umbrella of FOIA laws. And as I was explaining to you yesterday, I have filed thousands of FOIA requests for every Division I college coach in this state, cross country, football, basketball, hockey. I have never been turned down for a contract or details of a contract until this instance. It's public record. That's why I want to see it. And as I was explaining to you yesterday as well, the fact that Michigan State doesn't want to release it makes me want to see it more because I want to see what's in there. I don't care about the money. Like, we know what the money is. It's $95 million. It's funded in large part by Matt Ishbia and St. Andre. I'm not particularly interested in how much each of them contributed. We know it was probably about half of the total deal. Ishbia said on HBO Real Sports the other day that it was about $14 million out of his pocket. I'm not overly interested in that. The fact that Michigan State doesn't want this out there, I want to know if there's anything in there that is unusual, which to me would be if Matt Ishbia and Steve St. Andre have, like you said, a seat at the table regarding the future employment of Mel Tucker. If things go disastrously wrong over the next year or two, do they get to call up the president, whoever the president may be, and say, this isn't working, we want to make a change? And do they have the influence to do that because they're funding the majority of the contract? I want to know if there's anything in there. There may not be. I just want to know if there is. I want to know if there's any exit language on the gift in the deal. Can they pull out? A lot of people don't realize that most of these gifts to athletic departments, to universities, they are not ironclad. They can be pulled. We've seen it. I know for a fact Michigan State has had deals to put names on buildings regarding the athletic department, and the money quickly went away because that donor didn't like something that was being done in the athletic department. I know that's happened. So they're not ironclad. So I want to know if there's any language in there on how Ishbia and St. Andre could be able to get out of this deal. That's what I want to know. It's an unusual deal in that these two billionaires stepped up to fund the lion's share of this contract. Like I said, I don't care about the money. We know what the money is. He got paid what Michigan State was willing to pay a guy who had interest from other schools. He could have left. That's fine. But when an institution, a public institution like Michigan State, doesn't want to give something up that's public record, the question that any journalist is going to ask is why. I want to see it. It may not be worth a single story. We don't know. We're going to find out in 10 days. May not be worth anything. But if there's something in there that spells out some additional power that maybe Ishbia and St. Andre have over the athletic director or even over the university president, that's newsworthy. I want to know if that's in there.
Well, I think you opened the premise, though, with an apples to oranges comparison, right? Because I respect, I've touted you as one of the 5 best reporters in the state for like 5 years. I respect that you're very intimate with FOIA. How many of those contracts that you FOIA'd were privately funded and not coming from the normal coffers of the university? I mean, maybe you have done that, but
well, a lot of them are funded by boosters. A lot of good portion of the money. There's a reason why in these contracts with the big time coaches, football, basketball, that they have a quote base salary listed in the contract, right? And then and that's usually the least amount of the money of the deal. And then they have a huge chunk for radio and TV appearances. And then they have a huge chunk that's spelled out for speaker media engagement, because the base salary is coming from the university. And a lot of these extras that they tack on, the bigger part of the money is coming from donors and boosters, which is why it's spelled out differently. So while, for instance, Western Michigan just hired a new football coach. They're paying it $850,000 a year, which is a lot for a MAC school. $200,000 of that is base salary. Much of the rest is coming from a booster club to fund that. Now, on a much larger, that's a much smaller scale, obviously, than Mel Tucker's deal, but it's not unusual for donors to be paying a good portion of these contracts. This one's unusual because we don't get to see it. And that I just don't understand. And this is a problem with Michigan State, by the way. As you, I think, know, Michigan State has a FOIA problem.
100%.
They like to find any way around it. They're so close to the state capitol. I think it rubs off on them, because Michigan has some of the weakest FOIA laws for any legislative body. And Michigan State has tried to get around FOIA laws for a long time. There's of all these schools I deal with, they are routinely the most difficult in getting the information. They will ask, and because everyone gets a 15-day extension, business day extension, if they want it, they routinely will ask for that. I've joked that I could ask Michigan State, I could FOIA Michigan State for the fight song lyrics, and they would give me a 15-day extension. That's just what they do. I'm happy to know that this one is not going to apply to a 15-day extension. They're going to have to release it within 10 days. It sounds like they will. But again, it's not just about Mel Tucker. And I know that you've got your Michigan State people in a frenzy. It's not just about Mel Tucker. Obviously, Mel Tucker's contract is of interest because it was at the time one of the largest contracts. It's been passed over by many now. He started a trend, but it's a huge contract that may or may not have strings attached, and that's what we want to know. Look, we were just as fascinated with Jim Harbaugh's contract, the several contracts. The first one he got when he came from the 49ers, the one that he got when he had his pay cut in half a couple of years ago, and then the one he got last year after he stayed, didn't go for the Vikings, stayed and got his money back. We've been equally intrigued by what the details are in his contract, and we've been given those. Again, this is the only contract that I've ever FOIA'd for from a public institution that I've had a hard time getting my hands on. We have the money spelled out that he's going to make $95 million. It's all guaranteed. We have that, but we don't have this donor agreement, and it's a unique agreement. Again, when any public institution denies you information, the logical question from any journalist is why. That's the question I've been asking. That's why I FOIA'd for details on this long before the Free Press lawsuit. Been denied at every turn, tried different language, tried different avenues, denied. I just want to know. And again, we may get it. There may be nothing in there. It may not be worth a story. If there's nothing in there that's unusual, it's not going to be worth a story. So I just want to.
It'll be written. Come on.
What's that?
That story's getting written, even if
I'll tell you what, it's getting written. If there's anything in there that hasn't been previously reported, it's getting written.
Well, even if that's the case, there will be an article clarifying that there's nothing new here. I mean, it's just
I'm not too sure about that. I would not push to write that if that's the case. If there's anything in there that hasn't been reported, I will be interested in that. But the reality is there's probably going to be. It's probably going to break down the money a lot clearer than what we know, because somebody's paying half or more, and the other entity's paying half or less or more, whatever. There's going to be information in there. But look, the bottom line is, it's a public document. It's a public university. He's a public employee, and we have a right to know. And I'm not going to back down from that.
There are a lot of things that are public record that no one's sending a FOIA for and nobody's suing over. So again, and I opened it by saying I'm not even going to get into whether or not it's a public record. My confusion is the fervor to uncover this information. You said it's of the public interest.
Where's the fervor? Where's the fervor though? Explain that to me.
Hiring an attorney to get the information.
That's not
That's pretty fervorish.
That's not uncommon. There's a reason we have a lawyer on staff.
Okay,
that's not uncommon to sue for records that you're being denied.
Right. That's pretty fervorish though to lawyer up. But I mean, by definition, right?
When you are obligated to get information that you're not being given as a newspaper, this is not uncommon to go to court to try to get it. It's not.
Well, I'm not saying it's uncommon. I'm saying it's a sign of fervor to sue somebody. I mean,
you know what? It would be the same thing if they were holding back Jim Harbaugh's contract at Michigan. He's a public employee. He's a very public and notable figure and popular figure in this state. It's public record.
Well, it's funny because a couple people, I feel like
Michigan gave us the contract.
I was just, I don't know if you saw on Twitter, because I know you've blocked a few of the people because they told me, they want you to block.
Let me hold on really quickly. I've decided I was anti-blocking on Twitter for a while. I've decided that I'm just not going to be involved, given everything that's happened in the last several months. I'm just not going to be involved in the pissing match between Michigan and Michigan State anymore. And so if there's anything that comes at it that to me is not a reasonable argument that is just going to blanket take one side or another, I don't need to deal with it. I mean, it's either that or get off Twitter completely. My bosses, I don't think, sometimes they wish I'd get off Twitter, but they don't want me off Twitter completely. So I'm just not going to be sucked into that anymore. And if it's a reasonable argument, I'll engage. But from now on, I'm done with it. So that's why.
I'll fist bump you through the laptop for that one, because I was the same way. I was like, I will not block anybody for any reason. Like, I don't want to deal with it either. And my thing on Twitter blocking that I always say is my primary reason is not even for myself. It's like a quality control measure. If I'm having a conversation about sports and 4 of the first 7 comments are some troll thing, it's not just going to potentially distract me, but it's also bad for anybody watching my stuff or reading my stuff, because they're going to get pulled away and go yell at the Walmart Wolverine or the Shardy or whatever. So
I've always been willing to engage in reasonable dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
Ever since Tunnelgate and ever since Mozzie Smith, and now even this is fracturing, it's the heat is so intense right now that I'm just done with it. And so if it's not reasonable, I'm not going to engage, and I really don't need to be involved in it at all.
Well, and where I was going with that was basically today I had to clarify, because I saw you get yelled at least twice, maybe 3 or 4 times. I'd have to go back and check about, well, where were you guys on Jim Harbaugh? And I this morning had to go out and clarify. Actually, all the Harbaugh contracts were successfully FOIA, not just the most recent one, but like the 2017 update, the 2015, or like, we actually have had Harbaugh's contract every step of the way as it's been modified. So, we print details on every football, Division I football, basketball, and hockey coach in the state, because there's interest. We print them, everyone, Western Michigan or University of Michigan, doesn't matter. We print every one of them. The reason why I think this is different to me is I think there's a distinction between what's in the public interest and what's interesting to the public. I don't dispute that this is interesting to the public. I don't know that that's the same thing as having a public interest, where the implication is, I have some skin in the game. There's a public interest in how the fire department's funded because we have an interest in that functioning properly. I don't think this is that. You're talking about the top off on a contract that's not taxpayer funded to begin with, that's funded by 2 private donors. Again, I'm not getting into the weeds on the FOIA exemption or not. I'm with you. Without having seen the contract, there probably isn't anything inherently private that it would qualify it as an exemption. I just think that, again, we can disagree on whether it's a fervor or not. I think it's a fervor in the form of a lawsuit, which is an objective measure of how much you give a shit if you're willing to lawyer up and sue. I just think it outpaces the, quote, public interest. What interest does the public have? Not are they interested? I agree they're interested. I agree it's going to be the most clicked on thing all month. I agree. How is it in the public interest? Well, how is this anything like how a police department's funded, or who the police chief is and what he's making? I see these as completely different things.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to compare how fire departments and police departments are funded. I mean, that's real life stuff. Obviously, that's a great public interest. If there's there's something in that contract that says the university president or Alan Holler can't fire Mel Tucker without the sign off of 2 donors. That's of interest. And that is bizarre. I'm not saying that that's in there. Probably isn't. But if that's the case, that's a very unique and strange and questionable contract to enter into. So if there's something like that, I think that is in the public interest when your university president doesn't get to make the decisions for the university, or your athletic director doesn't get to make the decisions for the athletic department. I think it's a public interest if these guys can pull out of their agreement whenever something goes wrong. Because then where does that leave Michigan State? Somebody's going to have to pay that bill on that contract if they have an exit clause. I think there is a public interest there.
That's a good point.
So, those are the things. Those might not be in there. There's a very good chance that they're not. But those are the big questions that I have. And when, again, a public entity like Michigan State tells you, no, you can't see a public document or public information, the logical question is why? And that's what we're asking. And I'll push back on the legal thing. Yes, I will agree with you that it's not always publicized the way this was. I'll agree with you that, it was publicized quite big yesterday on both of the newspapers' websites. It is not uncommon for newspapers to sue for public records that they're not being given. It's not. It's fairly routine.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that fervor is not uncommon either. If you sue someone, you're pretty fired up about getting that information. But even take the lawsuit out of it, which I think is an objective measure of how much you give a shit. Like not you personally, but I mean the entity.
Let me push really quick. Let me push back.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. All right. So again, when Mel Tucker signed his contract in November, I filed FOIA. Again, we got the dollar amount from Michigan State because they have, obviously they're going to have to release that. 10 years, $95 million. Fine. Want the details on the agreement? No. I'll try this way. No. Try this way. No. Tried a million ways. No, you're not getting it. I even called a former employee that was high up at Michigan State to get advice on how I can word the FOIA to get this information. No, didn't work. If you don't push back legally, what's to stop them from continuing to do that? That's another point too. If you let them just say no and just walk away with your tail tucked between your legs, it can continue to happen. The lawsuit sends a statement, and it sends a very big statement to the university when you win that lawsuit. So that's where I would push back regarding that.
I mean, I'm not anti-suing for FOIA. I mean, my own attorney with my own FOIA claim against the very institution in question is asking me if I want to sue them because they have improperly blocked my FOIA requests on a much less meaningful issue and on a much less damaging issue to them. So I'm not anti any of that. My only qualm really is how enthusiastic people are to hunt down this information. And look, I'm not going to get into the race stuff. Just other than to say that it's out there. I'm not talking about the media. I'm not saying the media is responding to the public interest. So I don't think anybody in the media is racist towards Mel Tucker. That's not what I'm saying. But there is some of the counting a black man's money thing going on social media. And I think that has helped fuel the interest in this upstream of the media responding to that. Again, I'll say again, I am not saying you, the Free Press, or anybody cares about that. I'm just saying I think that contributes to this storm of interest in Mel Tucker's contract. I think it's fair to say that Mel Tucker's contract has an outwardly sized enthusiasm surrounding it in terms of interest, in terms of talking about it, even before this season went off the rails. I mean, this was all the case last year. I just think it's a bizarre, listen to what you and many people are saying. I want to know if Ishbia can just walk away and what if
Justin, that's important information.
But
because if he can, who fills the gap?
No,
contract. So these are important questions. I don't care to know how much he makes because I know how much he makes. If there are details in there that can alter the way the university typically runs and hiring and firing or whatever, if there's different details in that contract than we're used to seeing, that's of interest. It's worth noting.
No, I agree that if that stipulation is in there, but there's a lot to me. even asking that question is kind of odd. It would never even occurred to me or anyone that I've talked to about this, because I've talked about it more than I've ever wanted to privately with friends and stuff. Everyone's like, wait, they think Ishbia is going to call up at halftime and say, get rid of this guy? Like, yes, I agree that if that stipulation is in there, that would be pretty noteworthy. I just think there's a lot of things you could ask. Like, are we sure that Ishbia wasn't promised, a sweet box in Spartan Stadium, every third year, and that has to go to a potentially problematic interest group? I mean, it's like you could get into this like weave of conspiracies.
I'll point back to you. These are examples of questions I would have. I'm not saying that any of that is in there. And like I told you, I'm doubtful that there is. Ishbia has said there's no strings attached. That's fine, but we're not in the business in the media of just saying, oh, well, Ishbia says it, so it must be true with anybody. You trust, but you verify. That's kind of the credo. So, these are examples. I'm not saying that there's anything like that in there. But
no, I'm not saying.
I'll also say the fervor over Jim Harbaugh's contract details was just as high. It was very much of interest to a lot of people. All of the contracts, the huge one that he got, the one that was cut in half, and the one that restored his money after he had a good year, after he took him to the playoff last year. It's very much of interest. The difference is we got that information right away. We're being turned away anything other than 10 years, $95 million with Mel Tucker. So
if I were Michigan State, I would have handed it over.
Exactly. That's the point.
And I just want to clarify
that contributes to the fervor. When you decline the information, that contributes to this. It's not just the media doing this. It's Michigan State not turning it over. It has a big role in that as well.
No, I think the media and the public's obsession with it, and the obsession that's frankly on one side of the public in terms of the rooting interest.
The media, though, is obsessed with all things money, which is why, again, I FOIA'd for every coach's contract. The softball coach at Western Michigan, the baseball coach at Central Michigan. Like, I've FOIA'd for all these. We're obsessed with money. There's a reason a lot, that USA Today's salary database is so popular, because everyone wants to know how much people are making. People in this world, when I write a story after every football season and after every basketball season. It's a little tiny story just pointing out how much money this coach earned in bonuses this year. It might be $10,000. Jim Harbaugh has earned $2 million in bonuses this season already. When I post those stories, people are interested in that. It's money. We're very fascinated with money, and it's not unique to Mel Tucker. I'm telling you that right now. It's not unique to him.
If we're in a high school debate class, and I knew this going in, you'd be kicking my ass in this discussion, because
I sucked in high school debate too.
No, but I opened this by saying the facts are on your side in terms of the righteousness of this. My entire take on this, which is not a rational argument, is like, this is just lame and this sucks and I'm tired of it. Like, so that's not a compelling argument, really. But I do think that fatigue is reflective of a lot of people at Michigan State, both like official representatives of Michigan State, but also just the fan base. We're so tired of this, what we view as an outsized obsession with Mel Tucker's contract. And if your pushback is going to be, oh, well, what do you expect after 5-7? Again, this predates this season. I mean, this obsession's been going on.
I haven't filed a single FOIA, by the way, since the start of this season. Like, this dates back to, November, December, January of last year.
Right.
I don't care about the record. I don't care what he's making. He got what
I'm talking about
believed he deserves. The bottom line is, again, I would argue that if Michigan State just released a public document like they should have, there wouldn't be this fervor. It'd be a typical story that we publish on every coach's contract, every major coach's contract. The Jim Harbaugh fervor was there. The difference was we got that information right away. Michigan gave it to us. And by the way, Michigan's they're no prince when it comes to FOIA either. They're better than Michigan State, but they're not great. So, but they gave it to us. And so the fervor didn't last.
Michigan's been sued successfully multiple times. I was doing some research on that last night, and they're both bad, but You're not the only reporter I'm friendly with and have talked to. The consensus across the board is that Michigan is better for whatever.
Oh.
I mean, that's what let me
leave no doubt. let me leave no doubt. Michigan State, and this goes back to when I was a student there. I mean, it's kind of reflective of the Board of Trustees in a way. It's so weird, how much there's controversy in the Board of Trustees, and it's been that way forever. It's been like with FOIA, it's been that way forever.
That's why my friend Brian Masalam's not there anymore. Brian Masalam went on my show. I don't know what your opinion is of him. I know he's polarizing to some, but he's a good friend of mine. But he came on my show the first time, and we were talking about the secret nature of the trustees. And they were so mad at him, his colleagues, when he was sitting on the board during the Nassar stuff, because he was coming out. He talked to them privately first, saying, "Hey, guys, we got to get ahead of this." He was showing me some of the stuff. Like, he wanted to get ahead of the Nassar stuff. And he was like, "Guys, this is not going to be buttoned up. Like, we have to get ahead of this and address this and do the right thing." And they resented that. I mean, he's now gone too, but one of the trustees, I don't know if I can say this on camera. I can't. I'll just say that they weren't happy with him, and there was a sense that he was disloyal to the trustees because he was for transparency. So I'm with you on the culture. I 100% agree.
Transparency in general is just a good thing. All right. Can we agree on that? Like, and
I would have handed over the contract.
That's the thing. If this would have been handed over, it would have been reported out within a week to 10 days of when he signed his contract, just like we've done every time Harbaugh's had a new contract, just like I did yesterday with Western Michigan football coach's contract. These are reported out right away because the information is public. Just get ahead of it and get public information into the public sphere when you're asked for it. And that, and then you wouldn't have this issue of why does the media care 13 months after Mel Tucker signed his contract? The media cares because we're waiting 13 months to get the details of that contract, which is unusual. That's why we care. If we just walk away and accept the no, it's not going to help us down the road.
Well, no, I agree with that. Let's finish here. I just want to pose this to you as a question, and I know this is going to be speculation on your part. It's a guess because we don't know until we have the document in hand. But if you had to lean one way or the other, do you think it's going to be door number one? Oh my God, there's some real wonky, weird shit in here that is of great public interest, or is it going to be more door number two? Some coloring in the lines, but nothing really that interesting here when that document comes out. Are you more door one or door two?
I mean, if I had to guess, and I'm a terrible sports gambler, so I don't know that this would be very reliable, but I would suspect it would be number two. I would suspect there's not going to be much in there, which would just lead me to ask Michigan State, what the hell is taking you so long? I mean, you're making it worse by holding on to a document that should be in the public sphere. So yeah, I assume it's going to be that, but that's not going to stop me from that. I'm not going to sit there and say, well, I don't think there's going to be anything in there, so I'm just going to walk away from it. I don't think that's right either. I think that information that is public should be public. And if there's something worth writing about in that contract that's unusual or has not been reported, then we will report it.
Fair enough. I'm with you on door number two. I feel like this is going to be.
Can I just say one thing really quick too? And I just don't understand. And here's why I'm going on this blocking spree, right? And it's nothing personal against anybody. It's just for my own mental health, because ever since Tunnelgate to Mozzie Smith to now, it's just the heat on Twitter and in this whole rivalry. Everything is part of this conspiracy to make Michigan look good and Michigan look bad, or Michigan State look bad. And I'm just this thing. I was stunned yesterday when I wrote this story, and I'm starting to get tweets about the blue wall over this story. I just don't understand it. And that's why I'm just kind of had it. Like, I feel like every little thing is just going to be part of this attitude that the news media loves Michigan and the news media hates Michigan State, when I'm telling you, it's not true. It's just not. And for this to be lumped into that, it just doesn't make sense to me. So.
Oh, I'm with you on the fatigue there. I mean, the fatigue from the Michigan State side is it does feel like there's an obsession with every little thing Michigan State and Mel Tucker's contract and whatever. But you're right. Michigan State contributed to the buildup of that fervor, that interest, by not just issuing the FOIA request and granting the FOIA request on day one. I'm with you. So we ran along on this topic. I'm going to just go ahead and say from a rational standpoint, I think you like slaughtered me, but I knew I was going to the slaughter today because the facts really aren't on my side. I am just fatigued on this. I'm done with it.
I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people are. And again,
and let's move on.
Yeah, right. Just let's see it. Let's, it's public record. Let's move on. Again, when Jim Harbaugh had his pay cut in half, that was massive news. And we were all over that. It was released right away, the details. When he got the massive bump yet last year, it was massive news. We got it. The fact that we're sitting here 13 months later and waiting for it, I could see where Michigan State fans would be like, what the hell is your problem? Well, the problem is that we shouldn't be waiting 13 months to get it.
Very fair. So I am excited with 9 days and counting. I mean, they could theoretically just get it over with today, but
I'll be interested to see if they try to find a 10-day extension or a 15-day extension, because that's their MO. So.
Well, they're going to have to go outside the realm of normal FOIA.
They say they're going to comply, so we'll see.
Yeah, the spokesman came out and said like they're finding the best way to comply, but it's Michigan State. Never rule out kicking the can down the road. I mean, you never know, the earth might end 11 days from now. They might get away from this. So I just want like 2 minutes on the Tigers. And by the way, Ben had to do absolutely no work whatsoever for any potential Tigers talk tacked on, because there's nothing to produce. What am I going to have him do? Play the clip of the press conference, them announcing some free agent signing that they haven't made? I just, real quick, because I can't have Tony Paul on any of my shows without a little Tigers talk. This has been a historic spending offseason for this sport. You have one team that's looking at a $300 million payroll potentially if they sign one more guy in the Mets. What are the Tigers doing that the entire offseason is bringing back Matthew Boyd, who you non-tendered 11 months ago? What do you make of this? Is this all? I love Harris. I'm on the Harris train. I'm not saying I doubt Harris. This is an ownership thing. The top 5 guys on payroll on this team are Baez, in no particular order: Baez, Cabrera, Eduardo Rodriguez, Matt Boyd, and who am I forgetting? Jonathan Scope. Those are the 5. 3 bums, a bust, and a guy who's a reclamation project who might be a long reliever. What do you make of this, Tony?
Yeah, it's I actually am not overly surprised by the offseason that they've had. I feel like when there is a change in front office leadership, I think it's going to proceed methodically. You have a lot of work to do when you come into an organization, and you have to assess everything from the top all the way to the bottom: minor leagues, major leagues, front office, you name it. So it's not surprising to me that it's methodical. I thought that maybe, they need a catcher. They need another bat. It's surprising to me that they haven't somehow filled these gaps, and you're running out of time to probably do that. I mean, the guys are flying off the board. It is a historically rich offseason. The money that's being thrown around, $350 million today for Carlos Correa to the Giants. By the way, when I heard the Mets might sign Carlos Correa.
I know that's.
If they would have signed Carlos Correa, their luxury tax bill would have been $100 million.
I didn't believe that. I couldn't. Yeah. That was too much.
Yeah, but you're seeing that. I mean, you're seeing all these huge deals. Clearly, baseball's in a very good place. I love it when, this narrative keeps, every year it's baseball interest and it's no one cares. And it's like, well, somebody cares if they have all this money to spend on all these free agents. So it's a rich off season. But again, I just never got the sense. I don't think that Ilitch said to Scott Harris, "You're not spending money this offseason." I don't think that happened. I think that Harris came in and knew that this thing was in a lot worse shape. 2 years ago was a bit of a mirage. I think we can all agree on that. Their late season push and whatever. The things are a lot worse than I think that than maybe we believed a couple of years ago. So I think it was always going to be methodical. And this guy, I think, knows, he's already been very aggressive with the front office and setting up his scouting and drafting and all that. So it doesn't surprise me. I think it's a little disheartening that you didn't fill some needs and haven't filled some needs that you need, like catcher and outfielder. And I think they could use another starting pitcher. But the Matt Boyd deal, it's funny how, Tiger fans are like, oh, what, why, how, what? It's Matt Boyd. He might be good. I mean, he had a good month with Seattle. His strikeouts are way up. He might be a guy. I know they're wanting to start him. He might be a guy who emerges as a good bullpen arm. It's $10 million. The average salary in baseball is pushing $5 million. So it's like, it's not the end of the world that they signed Matt Boyd. I'm a little surprised they haven't filled some other gaps, even if on the cheap, even if some shrewd moves. I mean, they picked up a guy that they like in the Rule 5 draft. We know how that goes. Rule 5 guys have to stay on the roster. They struggle mightily. So I don't think that that's going to be any big thing. But I think whenever you have a guy like Scott Harris who comes in and realizes the extent of the rebuild, and he didn't want to use the word rebuild, but I'll use the word rebuild. I don't think it's going to be a 7-year rebuild, but it's definitely a restoration project in a lot of areas. I don't think you come in and you hand out those $100 million, $200 million contracts. I don't think you want to saddle yourself when you probably haven't fully evaluated what they need to do.
We're in the 3rd year in a row of Toronto shopping one of their catchers, reportedly. I for the 3rd year in a row, I'm asking to call on Alejandro Kirk. You have Sean Murphy traded from Oakland, a very, very strong catcher. If you look, weighted against that position, to me, a top 8 or 9 catcher in the sport, didn't demand a massive haul from Atlanta. Even if you make moves at that scale, I have no problem with the Matthew Boyd contract. Like, anybody with a pulse, a lefty especially, a pitcher in this day and age, like $10 million, you said it. I'm not criticizing the Boyd contract, but doing nothing else. And rebuild or not, Carlos Correa is 28 years old. You could sign him to that deal and have him be good for 2-3 years from now when things are getting rolling. I think he's overpaid, but at the end of the day, if everybody's overpaid, no one's overpaid. Everyone's, quote, overpaid now. I just don't understand. After this year, their committed payroll is like $22 million. Cabrera falls off, Scope falls off, Boyd falls back off. It's not 22. I think it's 28 or 32 or something like that. It's under 40 for sure, because it's just Baez and basically a bunch of nothing. Eduardo Rodriguez, and then that's it. So
maybe that's what Scott Harris is looking forward to. Maybe he's looking at what they have and he's saying, you know what, let's get these pieces gone, and we're going to have a spending spree next offseason, and then we'll see where our younger guys are, and you got some, you're going to see Spencer Turnbull come back this year. You're going to see Casey Mize come back the next year, see where these guys are and evaluate that way. Maybe that's what he's looking forward to. I would have been a huge proponent of putting Carlos Correa at shortstop and moving Javi Baez to second base and doing who knows what and who cares with Jonathan Scope. I think that, Carlos Correa is a guy that's worth investing in. I think he was probably, if you're going to hand out a long-term contract this offseason, I think he was the guy to long-term invest in. But I think Scott Harris has a different plan. I think he wants to, I think he's still evaluating, and I think he wants to see where they are with some of the guys they have in the minors. I think that's what this year is going to be.
I'm glad you said that you were in favor of Correa, because I thought by your answer that you were saying that you wouldn't have signed him.
No, of course. He was the guy. When you're under 30, I don't think you can ever justify a 13-year contract, right? Because the back end of that, it's not going to be good. I think we all know that.
Yeah, but he's underpaid.
But when you're under 30, I think you can justify it a little bit. So, I think that would have been great.
Yeah, he would have made more. Because that's the thing. I think the average is like $26 million or something. Like, he's a $35 million, but he just signed a $35 million contract last year. So, the year is scary. The term is scary, but it kind of comes out in the wash with the AAV. I just think if you had signed Correa to that deal, or even a $35 million a year, 10-year, whatever it is, but the same kind of money, you would still have a bottom 6 payroll next year. Not this upcoming year, like the year after these other contracts fall off. Even if with the contracts currently on the books, you're in the bottom third with that deal. I just don't understand why you wouldn't get that guy now. This was a much better class from my understanding than next year. I haven't looked that closely at it, just kind of at the top line. This was a chance to secure that first piece. Ivan Rodriguez was signed 2 years before the team really popped off.
It's the same thing we talked about last year, right? That I thought the Tigers should have started their rebuild, free agent spending a year earlier to start, because you're right. It went Ivan Rodriguez, it went Maglio Ordonez, it went Kenny Rogers, Todd Jones, so on, and then all of a sudden they're contenders. Somehow, I still don't know how that 2006 team made the World Series, but that's beside the point. You start before you're ready. You build those pieces, and so that's why we talked about that last year. So I would have been fine with that. Clearly, Scott Harris has a different philosophy. I don't think he was handcuffed by payroll, honestly. I think that he is still assessing and wants this year to probably really assess. So, but hey, they'll have new lights at the stadium.
Well, I think you're friends with Matt Sheehan. I know I am. But yeah, Sheehan had a great thing about hey, at least we got new lights here. And I think the most exciting news of the offseason is new lights, and hey, maybe he's going to move the fences in. This is not a criticism of Scott Harris. Scott Harris, I think, if I'm not going to get Theo Epstein, which was never realistic, I think Scott Harris would have been my first overall pick in the GM draft, president GM draft. Like, I love him. I'm 3 years away from criticizing him unless he does something really wonky. I just think this is incumbent on ownership to do the Mike Ilitch thing. Mike Ilitch was the one that got Cabrera here. It wasn't Dave Dombrowski. And by their own account, we're taking both of them at the.
You got Pudge Rodriguez too. And so,
right. Same thing. I remember that was the exact quote was, hey, what about that catcher? What about the catcher? He called Dombrowski. He called Dombrowski 4 years later about Cabrera, saying, hey, like, what's the deal?
Right. He read it in the paper.
So, right.
Yeah. The crazy thing about Pudge, there's a crazy thing about Pudge. There was concerns over his back. So he had a physical, like they all do, right? And he had a physical, I think, either at Beaumont or Detroit, Henry Ford or whatever, one of the hospitals locally. And the physical did not come back good when it came to his back. It was basically like one wrong move, and it could be over. And Mike Ilitch signed him anyway.
They did have an lumbar.
Yeah, he's like, we need this guy. The medical was so bad. Like, I've heard from people in front office that it was the worst medical they've ever seen. And Mike Ilitch was like, I don't care. We need something, and he's our guy. That's the difference between ownership, right? I mean, and that's the thing. People, you look at Cohen in New York, and you look at Cuban in Dallas, and and these fan owners. It's we had that in Detroit, and it was a lot of fun. And we have a businessman as an owner now, and maybe it'll work out, but it's not as much fun. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the Von Rodriguez thing is so funny. When Scott Boras gives one of his players a contract with a full out based on injury, that's how bad the medicals were. I mean, the Tigers it was like $1 million buyout on a $40 million contract if he had any type of, it was a specific lumbar spine issue, because I heard all the same stuff. And it's like
basically the doctor said one wrong move and not your career. I mean, your mobility could be gone. And Mike was just like, I don't care. Get me Pudge Rodriguez.
And he never had a problem with his lumbar.
No, he had a very fine career in Detroit, and he was the start. It was the start of the Renaissance. If Pudge Rodriguez doesn't sign, who knows what happens? Yeah.
So, I mean, someone's out there was on Twitter yesterday. Saying, I saw it a couple of times, but one person of note with a blue check mark is out there saying it's irresponsible. Well, it's less important now. That's been watered down. But it would have been reckless and irresponsible to sign Carlos Correa. You're still in the bottom third of payroll this year. You're even lower than that next year once these contracts fall off. To me, it's nuts. They had a chance to kickstart this. I'm mad they didn't. I wanted bigger Tigers deep dive with you when the dust settles. Maybe early next.
I think there very well could be a trade or two. I think that I don't think the roster's set. I think you'll see some decent pieces, but I don't think you're going to see that big piece. Obviously, most of them are off the market. I mean, you're down to Dansby Swanson. I'd still take him on a reasonable deal and move Baez to second, whatever. But I just don't think that's where Scott Harris's head is. I think he came in, looked around, and said, okay, we got issues, and we're going to do this methodically. So
I'm going to close here with a one question. I'm closing with a one question speed round. This has been my obsession du jour this offseason related to the Tigers so far. Spencer Torkelson, who can roll out of bed and hit, did not roll out of bed or do anything with the bat all year. 0 to 10, 10 being your hair's on fire, 0, you're asleep, you don't give a shit. Like, where's your panic meter with him? Big picture. Like, do you think this is a major problem where they burned a 1-1 pick on a guy that can't even hit as a first baseman? What's your take on it?
No, I'm at a 1 or a 2. Like, I just think it's too early. I think, you see a lot of guys come into the major leagues and they take off right away. For every one of those guys, there's 5 or 6 guys that it takes much longer, maybe an extra year, maybe an extra 2. You look at JD Martinez, didn't become a force till he was 27. So I'm not saying that it's going to take Torkelson that long. The bottom line is he's got the power. We've seen it. I think he hasn't quite learned the major league strike zone yet, and I think he's a little too tentative. I think he's afraid of striking out. I think those things are going to go away. It's his first year. I'm not that concerned at all. If he goes through and gets another 500 at bats this year and hits 180 with no power or limited power, then it's time to be concerned. But again, for every guy that takes off right away, there's 3, 4, 5 that it takes time. It's a major leagues. Yeah. It's not easy. you know?
Yeah. Andrew Vaughn made a nice leap, year 1 to 2 of Chicago, and he was sort of the comp, like the higher average, lower power version, 3rd overall pick the year before. And yeah, I don't know. The problem is the Tigers have never once produced a guy, and I've talked about this a lot, that finished in the top 9, an offensive player. Now, they've had pitchers with Verlander, obviously. They've never had a top 9 finisher in American League MVP since I was born. They've never drafted and developed one. Obviously, they've signed them. They've traded for them. They've never developed a guy that was even sniffing the MVP ballot in 30 years. That's almost impossible. You have guys like Chone Figgins had like a 2nd or 3rd finish in the MVP vote. It's not there. I mean, there are like objectively borderline bad players that have had magical seasons. Darren Erstad, and finished runner-up for the MVP. The fact that they haven't had one guy that they've drafted and developed that even had one magical year is just almost beyond. I mean, the
What
Rays,
year were you born?
Rays have like 5 guys that have done it.
What year were you born?
87.
Okay, so they've drafted a few guys that were all right, But yeah, you're right. You look at, off the top of my head, Travis Fryman, Curtis Granderson, Nick Castellanos. That's about it.
Yeah,
and Nick really didn't, Yeah, it's about it. No, I don't disagree with you.
I mean,
if you look at it in reality, they've drafted as an organization pretty terrible. Outside of that one draft class that ended up winning the '84 World Series, it's not been a team that's been built on the draft over the course of its lifetime.
That's the Bill Simmons thing, where like, hey, if you're the Trailblazers, you can't take Greg Oden when there's questions about his knees because you have the Sam Bowie thing. And I understand both perspectives of, you can't care. Whether or not it's rational, any type of Tigers position player that struggles a little bit out of the gate is immediately
there's fear.
Like, here we go again kind of thing.
But I think they got 2. I think they got 2 in Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson right now. I really do. I just think some guys, especially power hitters, I think it takes a little bit longer. Average hitters, guys that have commanded the strike zone well in the minor leagues and have a knack for that, like Riley Green, I think they can get off to a little bit better start. Power's just a little bit different, I think. So I'm just not that concerned. The guy's hit, and we've seen him. I mean, he's got tremendous power. If he learns the strike zone and gets a little aggressive. I remember Alex Avila used to, like, if a pitch was an inch off the plate, he would never swing at it, right? They'd just let it go. He had a great eye, but it used to drive Jim Leland nuts because Jim Leland's like, you've got some power. Like, take the pitch off the plate and drive it the other way, do some damage with it. I remember Leland told me that one time, and I went to Alex Avila. Jim thinks you should swing at pitches off the plate a little bit and drive them the other way. And Alex Avila's like, yeah, I don't swing at balls. So, it's just, it's a thing, you just have to learn to command the strike zone and learn the pitches in your hot zones. And I think this new hitting department that Scott Harris is kind of creating, I think there's going to be a big step up in analytical information that's being given to these guys. And we'll see if that makes a difference too. I'm just not that worried. I don't think a rookie year, I just don't get worried about rookie years because there's few guys that really have great rookie years.
Well, yeah, I mean, great is one thing. Well, I mean, Riley Green had the rookie year where you're like, yeah, he's far from a star, but there's flashes. Torkelson, I mean, what was his OPS? Like 490 or something? Yeah.
I think there's a difference. I mean, Riley Green's a contact hitter. He commands the strike zone well. Riley Green is also an elite defender. So he gets that too. So when you think of Riley Green, you're like, wow, this guy is amazing in the outfield too. So he can do both those. So, I just think a player like that's going to get off to a quicker start. If Torque has an OPS 400 or 500 this year, that's a problem. But I'm not that worried yet.
Fair enough. Tony Paul, you're the man. Appreciate it. I know we ran.
What about 26 minutes over?
You know what? You're a talkative guy, and you have a lot of great insight. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, if you sucked, I could have gotten you out a lot earlier, but you're good, so we run along.
Right.
So I appreciate you, Tony. I'll whine about the Tigers more with you as soon as we get closer to the spring training pitchers and catchers reporting, which it's going to be a riveting season again. Kicked in the balls for 6 months. I can't wait.
Hopefully we can get Chris. Hopefully we can get Chris too by then and do it together. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I mean that's the show. You guys together is the show I've wanted for like 3 years now. So I'm looking forward to that. You and Chris Castellani would be a hell of a show and hell of a panel. And I'll be in for it. If we disagree on anything, I better come ready because you two are the 2 best baseball guys that I know that I've had on my show. So I got to come correct on that one. Appreciate you, Tony. We'll see you soon. We have Darian Harris on Friday. That's going to be a really, really interesting topic. He's got so many titles at Michigan State now. He's director of player engagement. They should just name him like assistant AD at this point. Great guy, and was a supporter of the show early on, and I'm looking forward to that. So check us out Friday for sure. Working on some other stuff too. Justin Spiro, Off the Curb. Thanks again to Tony Paul, Ben Augusta. Great job on the horn. Appreciate you. See ya.